The possession of Zozo. Have you ever wondered what true fear feels like? The kind that grips your heart and won't let go? I never knew that kind of fear, until I met Zozo. It was a typical Friday night when my friends and I decided to play with a Ouija board. We had heard the stories, but didn't take them seriously. There was me, Rasmus, Sarah, Sophie, and Per, gathered in Per's dimly lit living room. The candles flickered as we placed our fingers on the planchette and asked our first question. "Is anyone there?" Sophie asked. For a while, nothing happened. We exchanged nervous glances, ready to laugh off the whole thing. But then, the planchette moved slowly to yes. My heart skipped a beat, but I tried to stay calm. "What's your name?" Sarah asked. The planchette moved again, faster this time. "Zozo." Rasmus chuckled nervously. "Oh, the infamous Zozo. Maybe we should stop." But curiosity got the better of us. We kept asking questions, and Zozo responded. At first, it was harmless, just spelling out random words. But then, things took a dark turn. "Do you want to hurt us?" Per asked, his voice shaky. The planchette shot to yes, and we all felt a cold draft sweep through the room. Before we could react, the planchette spelled out Sarah. Sarah's face went pale. "Me? Why me?" The planchette moved rapidly now, almost violently. M-I-N-E. Mine. Suddenly, Sarah's eyes rolled back, and she began to convulse. We tried to pull her hands away from the board, but it was like they were glued there. Her body went rigid, and then she started laughing. It was a laugh that didn't belong to her, maniacal, cold, and inhuman. "Sarah, stop!" I shouted, but she didn't respond. Her laughter grew louder, echoing around the room. The candles flickered wildly, and the temperature dropped. We were all frozen in fear, unable to move. Then, Sarah's voice changed. It was deeper, more guttural. "Zozo is here," she hissed, "and Sarah is mine." We tried to close the session, but the planchette wouldn't move to goodbye. Sarah's body twisted in unnatural ways, her laughter turning into a scream of pain and rage. It was as if two voices were battling for control. "Get out!" she shrieked, but it wasn't her voice. "Get out before he takes you too!" We scrambled to our feet, knocking over candles and stumbling in the dark. We ran out of the house, leaving Sarah behind, still laughing and screaming. We didn't stop running until we were far from Per's house, gasping for breath and shaking with fear. We called the police, but by the time they arrived, Sarah was gone. The house was empty, the Ouija board shattered into pieces. We never found her, and I don't think we ever will. We all tried to move on, but the memory of that night haunts us. Rasmus refuses to speak about it. Sophie moved away, trying to escape the nightmares. Per checked into a psychiatric hospital, his mind broken by what he saw. And me, I live in constant fear. I hear her laughter in my dreams, feel her presence in the dark. Zozo isn't done with us. He's still out there, waiting for the next foolish soul to summon him. So, if you ever think about using a Ouija board, think twice. Some demons are real, and once you invite them in, they never leave. The Haunting of Zozo. Have you ever heard of Zozo? The demon who haunts Ouija boards, latching onto those foolish enough to summon him? I didn't believe in the paranormal until it happened to me. It was a typical Friday night when my friends and I decided to try something different. We were bored and looking for a thrill, so when Andreas suggested we use a Ouija board, we all agreed, albeit with some hesitation. I had heard stories about the board, but I figured they were just that, stories. How wrong I was. We gathered in Andreas's basement, a dimly lit, musty space that already felt eerie. The air was thick with anticipation as we settled around the board, the flickering candlelight casting long shadows on the walls. Andreas, Linnea, Sophia, Johan and I placed our fingers lightly on the planchette. "Is anyone there?" Linnea asked, her voice barely above a whisper. For a moment, nothing happened. We exchanged nervous glances, ready to laugh off the whole thing. But then, the planchette moved, slowly at first, then with more force. It spelled out Zozo. Andreas chuckled nervously. "Zozo, that's a new one." I felt a chill run down my spine. I had read about Zozo online, a malevolent entity known to torment those who summon it. My heart pounded as we continued to ask questions. "What do you want?" Johan asked. The planchette moved quickly, spelling out YOU. A cold dread settled over us. We tried to end the session, but the planchette wouldn't move to goodbye. Instead, it began to spell out threats. DIESUFFERHELL. Die suffer hell. We yanked our hands away, breaking the connection. The room felt colder, the air heavy with an oppressive presence. We laughed it off, attributing it to our imaginations and the creepy atmosphere. But deep down, we all knew something wasn't right. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt like someone was watching me. Shadows seemed to move on their own, and I heard faint whispers that sent chills down my spine. I tried to convince myself it was just my mind playing tricks, but the feeling of dread only grew stronger. The next morning, I woke to find scratches on my arms and legs, as if something had clawed at me in my sleep. I showed them to my friends, who had similar marks. We were all terrified, but no one wanted to admit it. We tried to go about our lives as usual, but the haunting continued. Objects moved on their own, doors slammed shut, and we heard disembodied voices whispering our names. We were all on edge, barely sleeping, and constantly looking over our shoulders. The worst part was the feeling of being watched, an invisible presence that seemed to follow us everywhere. One late night, I was alone in my room when the temperature dropped suddenly. My breath came out in white puffs, and I felt a cold hand grip my shoulder. I spun around, but there was no one there. The shadows in the room seemed to pulse and shift, forming a dark, humanoid shape. "Zozo," I whispered, my voice trembling. The figure moved closer, its eyes glowing red in the darkness. I felt a wave of terror wash over me, paralyzing me in place. The figure reached out, and I felt an icy touch on my chest, squeezing the air from my lungs. "You are mine," a voice hissed in my ear. I struggled to breathe, my vision darkening. Just when I thought I couldn't take it anymore, the pressure released and the figure disappeared. I collapsed to the floor, gasping for air, my body shaking with fear. The next day, I gathered my friends and told them what had happened. They had all experienced similar encounters, and we realized that Zozo was not going to leave us alone. We researched ways to banish the demon, but nothing seemed to work. The haunting grew more intense, and we became desperate. In our last-ditch effort, we decided to confront Zozo one final time. We set up the Ouija board again, hoping to find a way to end the torment. As soon as we placed our fingers on the planchette, it moved violently, spelling out ZOZO. "What do you want from us?" I demanded, my voice shaking. "Fear," it spelled out. "We're not afraid of you," Andreas said, trying to sound brave. But his voice betrayed his fear. The planchette spelled out LIES. Lies. The air grew colder, and the candles flickered out, plunging us into darkness. A low, guttural laugh echoed around the room, sending shivers down our spines. Run, the board spelled. We didn't need to be told twice. We bolted from the basement, not stopping until we were outside, gasping for breath. The house behind us seemed to loom larger, its windows dark and foreboding. We never touched a Ouija board again, but the haunting never truly ended. The feeling of being watched, the cold spots, the whispers in the dark, they all persisted. We went our separate ways, hoping distance would weaken Zozo's hold on us. But the demon wasn't done. A year later, Andreas disappeared without a trace. Linnea started seeing a therapist after she was found wandering the streets, muttering about shadows and red eyes. Sophia moved away, trying to escape the memories, but she still calls me, terrified, saying Zozo is still with her. As for me, I live in constant fear, always looking over my shoulder. The scratches still appear, and I wake up to whispers in the night. Zozo may have been summoned through a game, but it's no game to him. He thrives on our fear, and he won't stop until he's broken us completely. So, if you ever think about using a Ouija board, remember our story. Maybe it's not worth opening up to the unknown. Just because you're bored, I suggest reading a book or watching a movie instead. The Unspoken Name. My name is Marcus, and this is my story. It started on a cold, dreary October evening. My friends and I, bored and looking for a thrill, decided to meet at my friend Jessica's house. Jessica had always been fascinated by the occult, collecting trinkets and books about everything from tarot cards to ghost stories. It was no surprise when she pulled out an old dusty Ouija board from her attic that night. "Let's do something spooky," Jessica said, her eyes gleaming with excitement. There were 5 of us: Jessica, Robin, Sophia, Kent, and me. We laughed it off at first, making jokes and teasing each other about who would scream first. But there was an underlying tension, a nervous anticipation. We dimmed the lights, lit a few candles, and settled around the Ouija board on Jessica's living room floor. The flickering candlelight cast eerie shadows, and the room fell silent, save for the occasional creak of the old house settling. Jessica placed her fingers on the planchette and motioned for us to do the same. "Is anyone there?" she asked. For a long moment, nothing happened. Then the planchette began to move slowly, almost imperceptibly. We glanced at each other, eyes wide. Robin chuckled nervously. "Who's messing around?" But no one confessed to moving it. The planchette slid to yes. We asked a series of innocuous questions. "What's your name?" "How old are you?" The planchette spelled out random, nonsensical answers that we dismissed as one of us having a laugh. It wasn't until Sophia asked, "Do you want to hurt us?" that things took a darker turn. The planchette shot to yes. Kent laughed, but it sounded hollow. "All right, who's the comedian?" "Ask it something else," I suggested. My curiosity piqued. Jessica hesitated, then asked, "Who do you want to hurt?" The planchette began to move again, this time with more force. It spelled out a name. Marcus. My heart skipped a beat. "Very funny," I said, trying to sound nonchalant. "Who's doing this?" No one admitted to it, and the atmosphere grew tense. We decided to end the session, but as we moved the planchette to goodbye, Jessica's cat Maya hissed loudly and bolted from the room. The candles flickered violently before going out, plunging us into darkness. We laughed it off, attributing it to a draft or the cat's skittish nature. But that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying the events of the evening. Eventually, I fell into a restless sleep. The next morning, I woke up with a splitting headache and a vague sense of unease. As I got ready for the day, I noticed something odd. On my nightstand was a piece of paper I didn't remember placing there. It had a single word scrawled on it: "Run." A chill ran down my spine. I dismissed it as a prank, crumpled up the paper, and tossed it in the trash. But the feeling of being watched persisted. Over the next few days, strange things began to happen. Objects in my apartment were moved when I knew I hadn't touched them. Doors would open and close on their own. The air felt colder, heavy with an unseen presence. I confided in Jessica, who suggested we do another session with the Ouija board to find out more. Despite my reservations, I agreed. Maybe it would provide some answers, or at the very least, some closure. We gathered again, this time at my place. The atmosphere was tense, and I could see the unease in my friend's eyes. We set up the board and lit candles around the room. As we placed our fingers on the planchette, I couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. "Is anyone here with us?" Jessica asked. The planchette moved quickly to yes. "Who are you?" she continued. The planchette spelled out, "You know." "Why are you here?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly. The planchette moved slowly this time, spelling out, "Never left." My heart pounded in my chest. "What do you want?" I asked. The planchette spelled out, "Fear." A cold sweat broke out on my forehead. "Why me?" I whispered. The planchette didn't move for a long moment. Then it spelled out, "Marcus." I pulled my hands away, unable to continue. The others followed suit, and we hastily moved the planchette to goodbye. We sat in silence, the gravity of the situation sinking in. "Maybe we should have a cleansing ritual," Sophia suggested, breaking the silence. Jessica nodded. "I'll gather some supplies. We need to do this properly." As Jessica prepared for the ritual, the rest of us tried to make sense of what was happening. Kent, always the skeptic, suggested that it was all in our heads, a collective hallucination brought on by our own fears. But the rest of us knew better. There was something real, something malevolent, and it had its sights set on me. That night, Jessica performed the cleansing ritual in my apartment. She burned sage, chanted incantations, and sprinkled salt in every corner. We felt a brief sense of relief, a fleeting hope that it might actually work. But the next morning, I woke to find the word "run" scrawled on my bathroom mirror, written in what looked like condensation, even though I hadn't taken a shower. My heart sank. Whatever it was still here. Over the next few weeks, the activity escalated. I would wake up in the middle of the night to find my furniture rearranged. I heard whispers in the dark, voices that seemed to come from nowhere and everywhere at once. I saw shadowy figures out of the corner of my eye, only to turn and find nothing there. I became increasingly paranoid, my nerves frayed to the breaking point. My friends noticed the change in me, and their concern grew. Jessica suggested I stay with her for a few days, hoping that distance from my apartment might help. I agreed, desperate for any reprieve. Staying at Jessica's provided a brief respite. For the first time in weeks, I felt a sense of normalcy. But it wasn't long before the strange occurrences followed me there. One night, as we sat in her living room, we heard a loud crash from the kitchen. We rushed in to find all the cabinet doors open, their contents strewn across the floor. "This isn't just about your apartment," Jessica said, her voice shaking. "It's following you." We decided to consult a local medium, hoping to find some information about the Ouija board. Maybe it had a dark history, something that could explain what was happening. The medium, an elderly woman named Greta, listened intently as we recounted our experiences. "Ouija boards are not to be taken lightly," she said, her voice grave. "They are gateways, and once opened, they cannot always be closed." "Is there anything we can do?" I asked, desperation evident in my voice. Greta shook her head. "The spirit has attached itself to you. It feeds on your fear and will not leave until it gets what it wants." "And what does it want?" Jessica asked. "To break you," Greta replied. We left Greta's house with heavy hearts, the weight of her words pressing down on us. I felt hopeless, trapped in a nightmare with no escape. The entity seemed to sense my despair and grew bolder. It began to torment me relentlessly, invading my thoughts and dreams. One night, I woke to find myself standing in the middle of my living room, my hands covered in scratches. I had no memory of how I got there or what had happened. The word "run" was scrawled on the walls in what looked like blood. I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to confront the spirit, to face whatever it was that had attached itself to me. I set up the Ouija board one last time, determined to get answers. I placed my fingers on the planchette, alone this time. "Who are you?" I asked, my voice steady despite the fear gnawing at me. The planchette moved quickly, spelling out, "You know." "What do you want from me?" I demanded. "Fear," it spelled. "Why won't you leave me alone?" I asked, my frustration boiling over. The planchette moved slowly, deliberately. "Never leave." "Then what do you want me to do?" I asked, desperation creeping into my voice. "Run." I threw the planchette across the room, my anger and fear reaching a breaking point. "Why me?" I screamed into the empty room. "What did I do to deserve this?" The room fell silent, the only sound my ragged breathing. I felt a presence behind me, cold and malevolent. I turned slowly, expecting to see something, but there was nothing there, just the oppressive darkness. I knew then that there was no escaping it. This entity, this malevolent force, was tethered to me, feeding off my fear and despair. I decided to leave everything behind, hoping that running away might provide some respite. I packed a small bag and left Jessica's house without telling anyone. I drove aimlessly for hours, eventually ending up in a small remote town. I rented a room in an old dilapidated motel and tried to start a new life. The first few nights were peaceful, almost too quiet. I began to hope that I had left the entity behind. But deep down, I knew it was only a matter of time. The oppressive feeling of being watched returned, stronger than ever. A week later at night, as I lay in bed, I heard a faint whisper. At first, I thought it was my mind playing tricks on me, but the whisper grew louder, more insistent. It was calling my name. "Marcus." I sat up, my heart pounding. "Who's there?" I demanded, my voice trembling. The whisper stopped, and the room fell deathly silent. I felt a cold breeze brush past me, and the shadows seemed to move, converging in the corner of the room. A figure began to take shape, dark and indistinct, but undeniably present. "Run," it whispered again. I scrambled out of bed, my fear reaching a fever pitch. I grabbed my bag and bolted out of the room, not stopping until I was back in my car. I drove through the night, the darkness pressing in on all sides. I didn't know where I was going, only that I had to keep moving. I ended up in another town, even smaller and more remote than the last. I found a cheap apartment and tried to settle in, but the sense of dread followed me. No matter where I went, the entity was always there, lurking in the shadows, whispering my name. Desperate for answers, I turned to the internet, scouring forums and websites for any information that might help. I came across a post on a paranormal forum that caught my eye. It was from someone who had experienced something similar, an entity that fed on fear and followed them wherever they went. The post suggested that the only way to rid oneself of such an entity was to confront it directly, to face one's fears head-on. It was a long shot, but I had nothing left to lose. I decided to return to the place where it all began, Jessica's house. I called Jessica and explained everything. She was horrified and insisted on helping me. We gathered our friends, and together we prepared for one final confrontation. Jessica had done extensive research on protection rituals and cleansing spells, and we hoped that combining our efforts might be enough to rid me of the entity. We gathered in Jessica's living room, the Ouija board in front of us. The atmosphere was tense, the air heavy with anticipation. Jessica lit candles and burned sage, chanting incantations to ward off negative energy. We placed our fingers on the planchette, and Jessica began to speak. "Spirit, we call upon you. Show yourself," she commanded. The planchette moved immediately, spelling out yes. "Why are you tormenting Marcus?" Jessica asked. "Fear," it spelled. "How can we make you leave?" Jessica continued. The planchette moved slowly, spelling out run. "We're not running anymore," I said, my voice firm. "What do you want from me?" The planchette moved faster, more forcefully. "Fear. Break you." "Why me?" I demanded. The planchette stopped moving, and the room grew colder. The candles flickered violently, and the shadows seemed to come alive, swirling around us. The figure from before began to take shape, more defined this time. It pointed directly at me. "Run!" it whispered, louder and more insistent. I stood my ground, my fear replaced by anger. "No," I said, "I'm not running anymore." The entity screamed, a sound that seemed to pierce through my very soul. The lights flickered, and the room shook violently. My friends cried out in fear, but I remained focused. I stared into the dark, hollow eyes of the entity, refusing to look away. "Leave me alone," I shouted. "You have no power over me." The entity's scream grew louder, the shadows closing in. I could feel its malevolent presence pressing down on me, trying to break me. But I held my ground, refusing to give in to the fear. "You're not welcome here," Jessica shouted, her voice strong and commanding. "Leave now, and never return." The entity writhed and twisted, its form becoming less distinct. The candles flared brightly, then went out, plunging us into darkness. For a moment there was silence. Then the oppressive feeling began to lift, the air growing warmer. I dropped to the floor, exhausted but relieved. We had done it. We had faced the entity and driven it away. But as I sat there, catching my breath, a nagging doubt crept into my mind. Was it really gone, or had it simply retreated, waiting for another opportunity? The planchette stopped moving, and the room grew colder. The candles flickered violently, and the shadows seemed to come alive, swirling around us. The figure from before began to take shape, more defined this time. It pointed directly at me. "Run!" it whispered, louder and more insistent. I stood my ground, my fear replaced by anger. "No," I said. "I'm not running anymore." The entity screamed, a sound that seemed to pierce through my very soul. The lights flickered, and the room shook violently. My friends cried out in fear, but I remained focused. I stared into the dark, hollow eyes of the entity, refusing to look away. "Leave me alone," I shouted. "You have no power over me." The entity's scream grew louder, the shadows closing in. I could feel its malevolent presence pressing down on me, trying to break me. But I held my ground, refusing to give in to the fear. "You're not welcome here," Jessica shouted, her voice strong and commanding. "Leave now, and never return." The entity writhed and twisted, its form becoming less distinct. The candles flared brightly, then went out, plunging us into darkness. For a moment there was silence. Then the oppressive feeling began to lift, the air growing warmer. I dropped to the floor, exhausted but relieved. We had done it. We had faced the entity and driven it away. But as I sat there, catching my breath, a nagging doubt crept into my mind. Was it really gone, or had it simply retreated, waiting for another opportunity? The next few days were uneventful, and I began to believe that we had succeeded. The sense of dread was gone, and I felt lighter, freer. But deep down, I knew that the entity was still out there, lurking in the shadows, waiting for me to let my guard down. And then it happened. One night, as I lay in bed, I heard the whisper again. "Marcus." I sat up, my heart pounding. The room was dark, and I could feel the cold presence of the entity. It was back, and this time it was stronger, more determined. "Run!" it whispered, its voice filled with malice. I knew then that there was no escaping it. No matter where I went, no matter how far I ran, it would always find me. The entity had latched onto me, feeding on my fear, and it would never let go. I realized that this was my life now, a constant battle against an unseen force that sought to break me. There would be no peace, no respite. The entity would haunt me forever, a relentless reminder of the night we foolishly opened the door to the other side. As I sit here, writing this, I can feel its presence behind me, watching, waiting. The air is cold, and the shadows are closing in. I know that it's only a matter of time before it strikes again, and I am filled with a sense of dread that I will never be free of. So, if you ever come across a Ouija board, heed my warning. Leave it alone. Do not open the door to the unknown, for you never know what might come through. And if you ever hear a whisper in the dark, telling you to run, listen. Run as fast and as far as you can, because once it has you in its sights, it will never let go. Do you believe? Have you ever felt a chill that wasn't from the cold? A prickling on the back of your neck that wasn't from being watched? I always thought I was too rational for that kind of thing. Until last year, that is, when everything changed. My name is Johannes. I've always been a skeptic when it comes to the paranormal. I was the guy who laughed off ghost stories and rolled my eyes at horror movies. But sometimes, life has a way of forcing you to confront the things you don't believe in. It all started when my friends and I decided to have a Halloween party. It was supposed to be fun. A night of costumes, candy, and scary stories. My friend Elias suggested we add a Ouija board to the mix. For a laugh, he said, winking. I wasn't keen on the idea, but I didn't want to be the buzzkill. So, I went along with it. We gathered at my apartment, a small but cozy place on the outskirts of town. There was something comforting about the familiar walls and the sounds of the city in the distance. It made it easier to dismiss any notion that something might go wrong. There were 5 of us that night: Elias, his girlfriend Hannah, my childhood friend Tommy, and his sister Maria. We were all in our mid-20s, a mix of thrill-seekers and cynics, perfect for what Elias had in mind. Elias brought the board out of his backpack, grinning like a kid with a new toy. It was old, made of wood with faded letters and numbers. The planchette, the small heart-shaped piece used to spell out messages, looked worn from use. "Got it at an antique shop," Elias explained, setting it on the coffee table in the center of the room. The guy said it was authentic. He wiggled his fingers in a mock spooky manner, earning a few laughs. We settled around the table, dimming the lights to add to the atmosphere. I felt a slight unease, but I shrugged it off. It was just a game, after all. Elias explained the rules, his voice taking on a serious tone that made the whole thing feel more significant. "We all place our fingers on the planchette," he instructed, "and we ask the spirits a question. If there's anyone out there, they'll answer us." We all complied, our fingers lightly touching the planchette. Elias started with the typical questions. "Is anyone here? What is your name?" At first, nothing happened. We exchanged amused glances, some of us rolling our eyes. Then, to my surprise, the planchette began to move. Slowly at first, then with more confidence. It spelled out, "Yes." Hannah let out a nervous giggle. "Okay, who's doing that?" We all swore we weren't moving it. I felt a twinge of anxiety. "All right, what's your name?" Elias asked. The planchette spelled out, Amanda, Amanda. We looked at each other, a mix of excitement and apprehension. Elias pressed on. "How old are you?" 7. There was a collective intake of breath. I felt the air grow colder, and the hair on my arms stood up. This was getting too real. Elias, unfazed, continued. "How did you die?" The planchette hesitated, then moved. Fire, fire. I swallowed hard, the gravity of the situation sinking in. Hannah looked like she was about to cry, and even Tommy seemed uneasy. Maria, however, was fascinated. "Amanda, are you alone?" she asked softly. "No." A chill ran down my spine. Elias looked at me, eyes wide. "Should we keep going?" I shook my head, but before I could say anything, the planchette moved again, faster this time. "Leave, leave." My heart pounded in my chest. "Guys, I think we should stop," I said, my voice shaking. Elias nodded, and we moved to say goodbye, as we had been instructed, but the planchette wouldn't budge. It was as if it was stuck, held down by an unseen force. Panic set in. "Goodbye, Amanda," Elias said loudly, trying to end the session. The planchette flew off the board, and the lights flickered. Hannah screamed, and we all jumped back. The room felt oppressive, like the air was thick with something malevolent. "What the hell was that?" Tommy shouted, his face pale. "I don't know," Elias replied, his bravado gone. "I don't know." We decided to call it a night. Elias and Hannah left quickly, clearly shaken. Tommy and Maria stayed behind to help me clean up, but none of us could shake the feeling that something had changed. The atmosphere in my apartment was different, heavier. After they left, I tried to sleep, but every creak and groan of the old building made me jump. I couldn't get Amanda's message out of my head. Leave. Leave what? My apartment? The board? I had so many questions, but no answers. The next morning, I found the planchette on the floor where it had landed. I picked it up gingerly, feeling a surge of unease. I decided to get rid of the board. I didn't want it in my home anymore. I threw it in the trash and tried to forget about it. But the board wasn't done with me. Over the next few days, strange things started happening. It began with small, easily dismissible incidents. Objects would move from where I left them. Lights flickered, even after I changed the bulbs. Doors creaked open and shut on their own. I tried to rationalize it. It was an old building. Old buildings make noises. Then one night, I woke up to the sound of whispering. It was faint, almost indistinguishable, but it was there. I sat up, straining to hear. The whispers grew louder, but I couldn't make out the words. It sounded like a child, a girl. My heart pounded as I realized who it must be. "Amanda?" I called out tentatively. The whispering stopped. The silence was deafening. I felt a cold breeze brush past me, making me shiver. I didn't sleep for the rest of the night. The next day, I called Elias. "Hey, have you experienced anything weird since that night?" He was quiet for a moment. "Yeah, actually. Hannah's been having nightmares, and we've been hearing noises. It's freaking us out, man." I told him about the whispers, the moving objects. He sounded as scared as I felt. "What do we do?" "I don't know," I admitted. "But we need to figure this out. We need to find a way to stop this." We decided to meet up and do some research. We spent hours reading about Ouija boards, hauntings, and spirits. We found countless stories similar to ours. People who had dabbled with the board and faced terrifying consequences. The common advice was to close the session properly, but we had tried that. It hadn't worked. As the days passed, the activity escalated. I would wake up with scratches on my arms, my dreams filled with fire and screaming. Objects would fly across the room, and the whispers became more insistent. I felt like I was being watched constantly, a feeling that only grew stronger with the time. One evening, Elias called me, his voice frantic. "Hannah's gone. I can't find her anywhere." "What do you mean gone?" "She just vanished. I went to the store, and when I came back, she was gone. Her phone's still here, her purse, everything." Panic gripped me. "Have you called the police?" "Yeah, but they're not taking it seriously. They think she just left or something." I knew it wasn't that simple. "I'll come over," I said. When I arrived at Elias's place, the atmosphere was oppressive. It felt like walking into a nightmare. Elias was pale, his eyes wide with fear. "It's her," he whispered. "It's Amanda." We searched the house, but there was no sign of Hannah. As we sat in the living room, trying to figure out what to do next, the temperature dropped suddenly. Our breath formed clouds in the air. The whispers started again, louder this time. "Johannes, Elias," the voice called out. "Help me." It was Hannah's voice. We looked at each other, terror in our eyes. "Hannah," Elias called out. "Where are you? Help me," the voice repeated, desperate and pleading. We followed the voice to the basement, where the air was even colder. The door creaked open slowly, and we stepped inside. The darkness was impenetrable, and the whispers grew louder, more frantic. "Please," Hannah's voice echoed. We found her in the corner, huddled and shivering. Her eyes were wide with fear, and she looked like she hadn't slept in days. "Hannah," Elias said, rushing to her side. "What happened?" "They won't leave me alone," she whispered. "The whispers, the shadows, they're always there." We managed to get her upstairs, but she was a shell of her former self. She wouldn't speak about what had happened, only repeating that she was cold and scared. We decided to take her to a hospital, hoping they could help. But things didn't get better. The activity followed us everywhere. Hannah's condition worsened, and the doctors couldn't find anything physically wrong with her. She would wake up screaming, claiming to see shadows in the corners of the room. Elias and I were at our wits' end, helpless and terrified. Maybe 1 week later, as I lay in bed trying to fall asleep, I heard the whispers again. They were clearer this time, more insistent. "Johannes, come to us." I sat up, heart pounding. I didn't want to go, but something compelled me to get out of bed. I walked through my apartment, the whispers guiding me. They led me to the kitchen, where the temperature dropped drastically. My breath formed visible puffs in the air. "Johannes!" the voice called, more insistent now. I looked around, but saw nothing. Then I noticed something on the kitchen table. It was the planchette, the same one I had thrown away. My blood ran cold. How had it come back? I picked it up, my hands trembling. The whispers grew louder, more urgent. "Johannes, play with us!" I dropped the planchette and backed away, my heart racing. I couldn't do this. I wouldn't. I ran back to my bedroom and slammed the door shut, trying to block out the whispers. But they didn't stop. They grew louder, filling my mind with their insistent call. "Johannes, you can't escape us." I didn't sleep that night. The whispers continued, relentless and unyielding. I felt like I was losing my mind. The next morning I called Elias. "We need to find a way to stop this," I said, my voice shaking. "We can't go on like this." He agreed, desperation clear in his voice. "But how? Nothing we've tried has worked." "We need to get rid of the board. For good." We decided to burn it. We figured that if we destroyed it completely, it might break whatever connection had been made. That evening, we met at a secluded spot in the woods, away from prying eyes. We built a small bonfire and threw the board and the planchette into the flames. As the wood caught fire, the surrounding air seemed to grow thicker. The flames danced and crackled, but instead of feeling relief, I felt a growing sense of dread. The whispers started again, louder and more frantic than ever. The fire flared up suddenly, and we both jumped back. The board burned quickly, turning to ash within minutes. But the whispers didn't stop. If anything, they grew louder, more desperate. "You can't get rid of us," they taunted. "We're always here." We stood there, watching the ashes of the board, feeling a mix of relief and fear. We had done it. We had destroyed the board. But the whispers remained. In the following days, the activity seemed to die down. The whispers became less frequent, and the oppressive feeling in my apartment lifted slightly. But Hannah's condition didn't improve. She remained withdrawn and terrified, a shadow of her former self. Elias was beside himself with worry, and I felt a growing sense of guilt. This had all started because of that stupid game. Weeks passed, and I tried to move on with my life. I avoided anything to do with the paranormal, focusing on work and trying to regain a sense of normalcy. But the whispers never truly went away. They were always there, lurking in the background, a constant reminder of the night that had changed everything. One night, I woke up to the sound of my phone ringing. It was Elias. "Johannes, you need to come over, now." His voice was panicked, and I felt a surge of fear. I dressed quickly and drove to his place, my heart pounding the entire way. When I arrived, I found him sitting on the porch, his face pale and drawn. "What's going on?" I asked, dreading the answer. "It's Hannah," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "She's gone." "What do you mean, gone?" "She just disappeared. I went to check on her and she was gone. No note, no sign of a struggle, just gone." I felt a chill run down my spine. "Did you call the police?" "They're on their way," he said, his voice shaking. "But they won't find anything. I know they won't." I sat down beside him, feeling a sense of helplessness wash over me. We had done everything we could think of to stop this, but it hadn't been enough. The board might have been destroyed, but whatever we had unleashed wasn't done with us. The police arrived and searched the house, but they found no clues. No sign of where Hannah might have gone. It was as if she had vanished into thin air. Ilias was inconsolable, and I didn't know how to help him. In the days that followed, I tried to be there for him as much as I could, but I was struggling with my own fear and guilt. The whispers were back, louder than ever. They followed me everywhere, a constant reminder of my failure. One night, I couldn't take it anymore. I decided to confront whatever was haunting me. I set up a camera in my apartment, determined to capture evidence of the whispers. I sat in the dark, listening to the voices, feeling a growing sense of dread. "Johannes, you can't escape us. Show yourself," I demanded, my voice shaking. "I'm not afraid of you." The room grew colder, and I felt a presence behind me. I turned slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. The shadows seemed to shift and move, forming into a shape. I stared, unable to look away, as the shape took on the form of a young girl. "Amanda," I whispered. The figure didn't respond. It just stood there, watching me with hollow eyes. I felt a wave of fear and sorrow wash over me. This wasn't just a spirit. It was something far more malevolent. "Why are you doing this?" I asked, my voice trembling. The figure seemed to shift and waver, its form flickering like a candle in the wind. "You invited us," it said, its voice a haunting echo. "You played the game. Now you must pay the price." I felt a surge of anger. "We didn't know," I said. "We didn't mean to." The figure's eyes seemed to bore into me, filled with a deep, unending sadness. "You all say so, but it's too late," it whispered. "You can't change what's been done." I felt a tear slide down my cheek. "What do you want from us?" The figure seemed to waver again, its form dissolving into shadows. "To remember," it said softly. "To suffer, to never forget." The room grew colder, and I felt the presence fade. The whispers grew fainter, but they didn't disappear. They never would. I knew that now. The police never found Hannah. Elias was devastated, and our friendship was strained to the breaking point. He blamed himself, and I couldn't bring myself to tell him the truth. That it was my fault. That we had unleashed something we couldn't control. The whispers still haunt me. They're a constant reminder of the night that changed everything. I try to live my life, but there's always a shadow hanging over me, a cold presence that never truly goes away. I don't know if I'll ever find peace, but I do know one thing. I'll never touch a Ouija board again. Spirits once invited will never leave. As I sit here, writing this, I can hear them. They're whispering to me, urging me to remember, to never forget. And I know, deep down, that I never will. Thanks for listening. Help my channel by like and subscribe. Sleep tight.